וידבר השם משה לאמור, קח את לוי בתוך בני ישראל. Take the Leviyim from the midst of the Bnei Yisrael v'tiartosam and purify them. They first have to be purified. This is an initiation process. Chosas aleim letarom. And this is what you must do to purify them. Hazeleim mechatos. You have to sprinkle on them the mechatos, that's the paraduma, the water of the paraduma. Ve'viru tar al kopsorum. You have to take a blade and remove all the hair from the body. V'chibsu bigdei v'toru. And they have to immerse their clothing in the mikvah, and then they will be purified. Now, we always speak about the word kach is leviyim, take. You take an inanimate object. You take an unintelligible creature. You take a person who's shackled, he's taken. He has no choice. So he's taken. He's the equivalent of an object. But if a person is free to choose as he wishes, what does it mean? Take them. We have before, when Aaron was installed to be the Kohen, Hashem says to Moshe, Kachas Aaron v'ezbanav. Take Aaron and his children. We find when Hashem had taken Adam and put him in Gan Eden, when he created him, it says, V'yikach esa Adam v'yosem osem beGan Eden. He put him in Gan Eden. Again, the word kach always connotes something which has nothing to do with the choice of the one who's being taken. And that's why it always applies to, as I said, an inanimate object or an unintelligible creature or a person who has no choice. But a person who has choice, he's not taken. You make a suggestion and he chooses to do or not to do. But yet in all these instances, we find the term kach, take the Leviyim. Like I once told you the story. Somebody once wanted to meet me, and I get a call from a secretary that says, Mr. So-and-so would like to see you at a certain hour. So I told the person, the secretary, he may want to see me. The question is, do I want to see him? And I hung up the phone. Next, 5 minutes later, the call comes in. When could Mr. So-and-so see you if you choose to come? We have choice. But yet, in all these instances, the Torah uses the term, take Aaron, take the Leviyim. He took him. Why? So Rashi says over here, which he cites Chazal, which it's always explained the same way. Kochim b'dvarim. Persuade them. Convince them. What should you say to the Leviyim? Ashreichem shetizku li'o shamoshel l'mokom. You're fortunate that you merited to be the officiants to Hashem. That's how you take them. That's the point of persuasion. I mean, when you tell them that, they basically have no choice. It's like there's an expression, it's an offer I can't turn down. It's that kind of thing. The person has choice, but when you're persuaded and you're convinced, there's no what? There's no alternative. Choice is when you see an alternative. There is no alternative. So therefore, the term kach is mentioned. Kach is Aaron. Also over there, Hashem says to Moshe, persuade him. When you're persuaded, persuasion is you don't see the alternative. There's no choice. And therefore, you take it. We always use it in a negative context. Person who is taken advantage of or conned, he's been taken. What does he's been taken? He's been convinced in a way where if he would have known differently, he wouldn't have done it. That's the expression, taken. When Hashem took Adam, put him in Gan Eden, the same thing. The opportunity to be put in that location, which ultimately the objective is something which is nothing equivalent to that in the history of any existence. Adam couldn't turn it down. That's V'yikach Hashem is Odom ve'osam begaden. He put him in the garden, in Gan Eden. We'd mentioned that when the Jews were counted, the ordinary Jew was counted from the age of 20 and above. The one who was eligible for conscription. The Leviyim were counted from the age of 30 days old. So Rashi over there, one of the explanations was that because they are Legion Shel Melech, the God's legion, the legion of the king is counted differently. Secondly, Rashi over there says that since Hashem had foreseen that ultimately the Jews are going to sin with the Chet HaMeraglim, and there's going to be a decree that they should perish over the 40-year period, and the Leviyim, because they did not do the Egel, they would not be part of that decree. Therefore, they counted differently because the decree was only on those that were counted from the age of 20 and above. So since it's a different classification, they will not be affected by that decree. The decree has nothing to do with them because they were not involved in the Chet HaMeraglim. Now, we had explained there were many Jews that were not involved in the Chet HaEgel, but yet every Jew that existed, despite that they ascended to a level of where each of them was endowed with a level of distinction, as it says, 2 crowns, one for Nas, one for Nishma. When the Jews did the Chet Egel, every one of them was actually diminished, and they had to forfeit those levels of spiritual distinction. Even the Jews that were not involved, including Leviyim. The Leviyim also were diminished, were compromised with Chet Egel, although they weren't part of the Chet Egel. As it says, just to the contrary, when Moshe said, Mila Shem Eli, they went and they killed all the idolaters, but yet they were also compromised and they forfeited their spiritual standing. Why? Because the decree was on Klal Yisrael. And because they were part of Klal Yisrael, therefore they were compromised because of this decree. The Chet of Meraglim, because they were counted separately, the decree was on Klal Yisrael, not on those counted between the ages of 20 and up. The Leviyim that were counted differently, they were counted from the age of 30 days, the decree was not on that class of Jews. Therefore, they did not perish over the 40-year period. But the Chet HaEgel, every one of us was affected, even those who did not participate, even the Leviyim, who were adamantly opposed to it, and they even were openly committed to Moshe Rabbeinu. So therefore, they needed this process. They needed this purification, because since they were affected and so-called compromised because of the Chet HaEgel, now they have to be initiated to be reinstated or to become that officiant, which they were not qualified until this process takes place. Therefore, they had to have all the hair removed from their bodies. And they had to immerse themselves in the mikveh in their clothing. We'll see, they had to be waved. Let's see Rashi. Because a number of them were tummy mess. They got in contact with the dead. Now, this is the point. Ve'viru sar al kol psoram. You have to take a blade, a straight blade, and pass it over all their flesh. Now, the question is, why do you have to remove their hair? Moshe Darshan. Who are originally the officiants who are going to do the service in the Mishkan? It was the B'chorim, the firstborn. The firstborn were disqualified because the Chet HaEgel, so they took the place of the B'chorim. They are taking the place of the B'chorim who actually served Avodah Zorah. The crew is Zivchei Mason. And what does Avodah Zorah refer to? As Zivchei Mason. Vabetzorah Kori Mes. A person who's a leper is also referred to as a mess. His kikom kaglach kimitzoroyim. Therefore, they have to have all the hair removed from the body like a mitzorah. Part of the reinstatement process, the purification of a mitzorah is he has to have all the hair of his body removed. That's mitzorah. We say mitzorah choshev kemes. A leper is like he's a dead man. He's disconnected. So when he's reconnected and he's now eligible to come back into the Klal Yisrael, he has to what? He has to remove all the hair off his body. Now that the Leviyim are similarly about they're atoning for what? For the Bechorim who are disqualified because of Avodah Zarah. What is the process to reinstate them? You have to remove all the hair off their body. Because again, we're all part of that decree. We're all tainted with the Chet Egel. So the Bechorim themselves who were involved, they themselves were disqualified. The Shevet Levi that was not involved to any degree, it's only because they're part of the totality of Klal Yisrael. They were qualified and they could be reinstated. They took the place of the Bechorim. But what is the process to bring that about? You have to remove the hair similar to the Mitzorah. As the Mitzorah is Choshev Kemes, and what? And idolatry is called Zivchei Mesim. So just as the Mitzorah come back into the camp, he has to have all the hair removed off his body. The Levi, to assume that status, has to have all the hair removed off his body. The Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah, based on a pasuk, that just as the remains of a human being contaminates, but oil, if you have the remains of a Jew in a house, anything which is under that roof becomes contaminated. A Mitzorah, if he walks into a room, into a house, everything in that house becomes contaminated. Just as the mess, the corpse generates that impurity, the Mitzorah generates that same level of impurity. Why? Because since Avodah Zarah is called, the mess is dead, the corpse generates it. A Mitzorah Choshev Kemesi also generates. What about if you have idolatry? You take something idolatrous and bring it into a room. Does it contaminate everything in the room? Since, as he brings over here, that idolatry is also called Zivchei Mesim. Idolatry is called Zivchei Mesim. It's like bringing the sacrifice for the dead. It generates contamination as the corpse generates contamination. So if you have idolatry in a location, everything within that location, if it's under the same roof, becomes contaminated. I'm going to skip a little bit now. Yudalid.
Rabbi?
1 second. Vivdaltas Leviyim. And after undergoing this, as it says, they put their hands on the korban and then they're waved by Aaron. They are separated. Vivdaltas Leviyim b'toch Israel. You will separate the Leviyim from the midst of the Bnei Israel. Voyuli Leviyim. And now the Leviyim are going to be mine. After they're initiated and they're waved, the Leviyim come to serve in the Ol Moed. The Tiarta Osam, you will purify them. Ve'nafta Osam Trufa, and you will do the waving. Because they were given to me from the Bnei Yisrael. Tachas pitras kol rechem bechor kol bnei Yisrael lakachti osam li. They are in the place of all the firstborn who opened the womb of bnei Yisrael. I've taken them for me. Let's take a look in Rashi. First, what is the double expression? They are given, they are given. Lusunim lamaso. They are designated for carrying. They carried the Mishkan or transported it. Lusunim lishir. And also, they have an obligation to sing during the service at certain times, to sing and play the instruments. He says, the firstborn legally are rightfully mine. Why are they rightfully mine? It's like, it's my possession. Shigati alem be'bechori Mitzrayim. I protected them among the firstborn of the Egyptians. Meaning, there's a halacha, if you have an ir nidachas, you have a city where the majority of the city did idolatry, so the Torah tells us that the idolaters are killed. The rest of the members of the community were not, they're sent out of the community, and everything within the city is razed, is burnt. All the possessions, even the possessions of the people who are not involved in idolatry, because that's considered ir nidachas. It's a condemned city, and everything in that city is contaminated. It has to be destroyed. And that location is razed, and you're not even permitted to rebuild that community because of the intensity of the purity of what that community was. It has to be totally destroyed. So the Mishnah tells us in Sanhedrin, what about if you had korbanos? You had animals that already were consecrated for korbanos, for sacrifices. They're not destroyed, or other possessions. You had a mezuzah. You had a Sefer Torah in the community. It's not burnt. Why? Because the Torah tells us, shlolo. What do you burn? It's spoils. The spoils of the city. Shlolo v'lo shlol shamayim. The spoils of the city, but not the spoils which are designated for God. So since the korban was pre-consecrated before it was pronounced to be this idolatrous city, because the shlal shamayim, doesn't fall under that classification of the ir nidachas. It's like God's domain. It's not in the domain of the city. So all the B'chorim were killed at midnight. Klal Yisrael, they were B'chorim also. The B'chor has a certain degree of culpability because he's the eldest of the community of the family. As a result of that, the Jews were idolaters also. And it was Midas Adin. And Midas Adin doesn't differentiate whether you're tzaddik, not tzaddik, and there's culpability. But yet the B'chorim of the Jews did not die. Why? Because since Hashem sanctified them, he took them into his domain. Once they're in his domain, they're not subject to what happens to anyone else. And that's the reason why the B'chorim did not die. And that's why the B'chorim initially were the ones who were qualified to be the officiants, to be the Kohanim. Once they became tainted with idolatry, the Leviyim, who are not involved with the idolatry and underwent this purification process, they take the place of the B'chorim. But who are the B'chorim? Kili. They're in my domain. And Rashi, Lakachti osam li achito begel. They're in my domain until they had gone astray with the Egel. Now I'm taking the Leviyim, they should take the place of the B'chorim who are in my domain. So over here, there's an important Sifarno. Little further, Yud Zayin, the pasuk, then this Sifarno. To me are all the firstborn in Bnei Yisrael, whether it's the human being or the animal. B'yom hakosi kol b'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim. When I had smitten all the firstborn in Mitzrayim, Higdashti osamli, I sanctified them for me. At that moment, to prevent them from being destroyed together with the firstborn of the Egyptians, Higdashti osamli, I sanctified them for myself, meaning I took them into my domain. Take a look in the Sefarno. Hoyatam, at that time, I sanctify him for me just as something which is consecrated. It cannot be used within an ordinary context. You can't work with it. The law is that the b'chor of an animal, you're not permitted to work with it. You're not permitted to shear it. So by sanctifying the firstborn, they took on a consecrated status. They were not protected from Mishlachos Malchei Roim, right? There were other angels, there were costing angels that came to Egypt. And since the Bechor is the person of distinction among the people, the kulam tolibem, and the culpability is on them, on the Bechor, because they have that level of distinction. So the reason why the Bechor has to be redeemed is that he should re-enter into an ordinary status. Otherwise, you would not be permitted. The Bechor originally was consecrated like something that's consecrated, when something consecrates something. And it had to be done that they should be protected from Mishlachas Malchei Roim. From this retinue of these accosting angels, they would have been compromised. But because they were consecrated, as a result of that, they were protected. So therefore, they have to be redeemed. So now they go from that consecrated status back to the ordinary status. Like you redeem something that's consecrated. This is the concept. This is the Sefarno. Now there's this famous pasuk, the Ednos Leviyim. I will take the Leviyim, Nesunim Aaron Levonov, B'toch Bnei Yisrael. They are given to Aaron and his sons among the Bnei Yisrael. Lavaros Avodas Bnei Yisrael. It could have said Lavaros Avodosom, right? To do their service. But it mentions Bnei Yisrael the second time. Ulechaper Al Bnei Yisrael, to atone Bnei Yisrael. V'lo yeh Bnei Yisrael negev, and there will not be any plague among the Bnei Yisrael. Begesh is Bnei Yisrael al Kodesh, when the Bnei Yisrael approach the Kodesh. So here we have in one pasuk, the Jews refer to as Bnei Yisrael 5 times. We could have used the pronoun, or there could have been a reference to them without mentioning again Bnei Yisrael 5 times. But yet, in one, and we know how careful the Torah is not to expend an extra word. But here in this one pasuk, we have Bnei Yisrael mentioned 5 times. And Rashi cites the Chazal, the Medrash. Chomesh pomim nema Bnei Yisrael b'mikra zeh. In this one pasuk, we have Bnei Yisrael mentioned 5 times. Lo diachi boson, to make known God's special love for the Klal Yisrael. Because we see that the reference, the mention, is repeated in one pasuk multiple times, and it's mentioned 5 times. Lo diachi boson. Why 5? Because it's the same number as Chamisha Chumshi Torah, but it's lo diachi boson, to make known the special love Hashem has for Klal Yisrael. The Medrash explains that a person who truly loves his son, whenever he refers to his son, because of the love, he always mentions him by name. Why? Because if you say he, use a pronoun, it doesn't evoke the feeling as when you mention the son. But the child that you love, every time you mention that name, it evokes that special feeling of love for your child. You don't say he. You say whatever his name is. And when you mention the name, it evokes that love. So by mentioning the name Bnei Yisrael 5 times, one pasuk, rather than referring to us with a pronoun, that shows Hashem's love for the Bnei Yisrael. 5 times. Why are the Jews special? He loves us. Why does he love us? There's a reason why he loves us. Because at Sinai, when he offered the Torah to the world and they all turned it down, who said Nasav Nishma? Who embraced it unequivocally? Only Klal Yisrael. So the reason why which people met the objective of creation, that creation, why it was created, now will have relevance to achieve that objective. Only Klal Yisrael. Lodiach Chibasa Shel Yisrael, which is mentioned 5 times, because we are the ones which have relevance to Chamish Chumshei Torah. It's only because we are that. That is the basis for the love. Otherwise, there's no basis for the love. If we would have not accepted the Torah Sinai, what did Hashem say to us? The world's reverting back to pre-existence. The value of creation is only for one reason. Chamish Chumshei Torah, the Torah itself. But if you don't accept the Torah, there is no purpose. Therefore, everything reverts back to pre-creation, pre-existence. So what's lo dichi boson? Hashem is, by saying it 5 times, he's making known the reason why. Because they are the ones who gave purpose to existence. And they were willing to forego everything for the sake of the Torah itself. That's not some nishma. We accept unequivocally. Whatever the extent of the obligation is, it doesn't make a difference. We want to be part of you. And whatever it takes to be part of you, we accept unequivocally. That's lo diachi bosa. It's not God is playing favorites. Years ago, there was a person, Yad Avram, he's still associated. He asked me a question. He says, the Jews, we behave like elitists. We refer to ourselves as the chosen people. A little bit slightly arrogant. How do you think the non-Jew takes that? That we are the chosen. We're chosen, they're not chosen. Why? How do we even we should have a little humility and not say that. So I said to him, a person is of royalty and you have commoners. And a person says, I am from the royal family. Is that arrogance? Or is that just the reality of who you are? You're of royalty, the other person is a commoner. He's not of royalty. Because at Sinai, God took us as his people. And he says, you are the people who are the objective, who met the objective of creation. And we have that special relationship. And you're attached to me. I consider you bonum atem l'Hashem Elokechem. You're like my children. Inextricable between us. That's the bond. That's elitism. It's not being elite. It's a reality. You have a person who could press 1,000 pounds, and a person can't pick up more than 5 pounds. That's elitism. That's a reality. You have a capacity the other person doesn't have. The person has an intellectual capacity which is multiple to someone else. That's elitist. It's a reality. That's his capacity. Hashem goes and makes it known why the Jews have that right to identify themselves as special. 5 times in one posuk. Of course, we accepted the Torah. We gave meaning to existence where the rest of the world turned their back on God. Therefore, we are special and the rest of the world are not special for that reason.